Hello, and welcome to the guide to the top 10 most powerful women in the U.S. assignment. This is a guide for creating a strong top 10 list, and hopefully you will be able to use it in order to improve your paper. Remember, the paper is due right before Thanksgiving. In order to create a strong top 10 list, one of the most important things we need to do is we need to understand what the nature of power is. If we're looking at who are the top 10 most powerful women in the United States, then what do we mean by power? I've included here several traditional political science definitions of power. First, from your textbook, Robert Dahl, he says A has power over B to the extent he can get B to do something he wouldn't otherwise do. I find this a somewhat ironic definition in light of the topic we've chosen. It definitely shows how different the United States is today than it was in 1957, that a political science definition of power would just assume a male figure influencing other men. I liked Max Weber's definition, the probability that one actor within a social relationship will be in a position to carry out his will despite resistances. You get this idea that conflict and the ability to influence others in a conflict is an important aspect. Definitely the idea of power involves social relationships in some ways. But there's also many other definitions, and as you're writing your paper, the key to having a strong paper will be to find a good definition. And I will give you a lot of leeway in that definition, but it should be tied to some conception of power that is standard. If your definition of power is just whatever creates a list that you already have, that's not what we're looking for. And certainly we're looking for something different than who's the most important or who is the most famous. Power is definitely something different than fame. As we try to imagine a reasonable organization for your paper, one of the things that you should consider is that you need to try to create an effective paper, something that gets across your points. You are both creating a list that's going to tell me a little bit about the nature of power, and you're creating a list that's going to tell me which women meet those criteria. So you might want to begin with an introduction that defines power, mentions your impression of whether women have gained political power in the United States over the past some amount of time. And it should finish by stating that you're offering a list of the most powerful women in the United States, given your criteria. Now, I think that you're definitely going to want to create a ranked list. It's not as effective if you're going to just present this in one giant paragraph where you mention somebody and then say, and she's my sixth most powerful. And then you mention someone who's your fourth most powerful. Now, I guess it's theoretically possible that you would have a thematic list, but that's not what the goal of this assignment is. So you should rank your 10 most powerful women in the United States from 1 to 10, and then you should give a brief explanation for how each of the women on the list meets your criteria. Now, you can either do this in a paragraph after the list, or, and what I'm hoping for, is a brief 2, 3, or 4 sentence discussion of each woman and how she meets the criteria on the list, just one after the next. You don't need to be clever in your presentation, but you need to make your strongest possible argument. And then I would finish with a conclusion that makes a supportable claim that your list tells the reader both something about the women on the list and about power. You can add your impression of what it says about political power for women, again, sort of as a valedictory statement. You will definitely need to defend your selections. For each entry on your list, you should identify the person and the office or status this person holds, which you feel confers power on her. So obviously, somebody might hold some position of, respect or such that does not really confer power on her. However, I want to know why you're saying that this person is powerful. If you're going to tell me that somebody is a television star and therefore she's one of the 10 most powerful women in America, the first thing I'm going to say is, well, why do I suspect that a television star would be one of the 10 most powerful women in America? Now, it might be because of some other activity. And then, so you definitely want to make sure that you mention that activity. You should explain briefly why you believe this person holds a great deal of power. Remember, you're asserting that someone is one of the 10 most powerful women in the country. That's not the same as saying that this person is, in some sense, powerful. It might be that your aunt is a corporate lawyer in Atlanta. And if this was a list where you were supposed to select 10 of the 475,000 most powerful women in America, I think that you could make a good argument by just saying this woman is a corporate lawyer in Atlanta. But the top 10, that's a rather exalted list. And I would certainly think that you would have to have done something beyond just holding some rather decent, privileged position in your hometown. You should remember always that you're conveying your thoughts, you're making a case. If the reader doesn't understand, or the reader's unconvinced, or the reader just doesn't even believe you, then you've not accomplished your goals. You're not trying to trick the reader. This is not an effort to present a list that can't be proven wrong. This is an effort to present a list that is demonstrably correct. There might not be a precise right or wrong, but you're making an argument as though you really are presenting a list that's defensible. For this assignment, you shouldn't tell me, in my opinion, or I think, well, some may not agree. Yeah, some might not agree with you. It's up to you to convince me that you're right. And so when you say things that are qualified, or you say things that make weak presentation, that's not meeting your goals. Of course, it's your opinion, but it should be, in your opinion, right. And so I strongly encourage you to present the best case that you can for these women that you've included in your list. Let's talk a little bit about the rules. Now, each of these rules is something that you should be able to find within the directions themselves. I've noticed that it's very effective with some people to present a paper where you write in paragraph form and it's artfully done and you account for all possibilities. And for others, it's more effective to give someone a list of bullet points. So by looking at this slide presentation, you get to see the bullet point version of some of the same things that you would see in the directions if you read it closely. If you want to develop a skill that is very useful to you going forward in your academic career, one of the things you might want to do is compare the bullet points that I have listed here to the directions that are handed out. And as you can develop a way to best present notes and information so that you'll understand it later, that's probably one of the most important skills that any course could ever teach you. So one of the rules is that the list must consist of living people. Now you'll see in my presentation that I've actually given you a lot of photos of very famous, very important, and at their time, very powerful American women in politics. You'll have an opportunity to get some bonus points later by noting who these people are. However, I think that for this assignment, if we say who are the 10 most powerful women in America, in order to still wield that power, they have to be amongst the living. This is in the paper where you're going to prove to me that the spirit of Harriet Tubman is what motivates America today. Instead, we're looking at, in concrete terms, who has power today in the United States. The list must consist of people who engage in U.S. politics or state politics in the United States. I was asked whether someone had to be an American, and I think that that's a very broad, you can define that broadly. Does someone have to be a citizen? Does somebody have to be a person who was born in the United States? And I would say no to both of those questions. But do they have to work within the American political system in order to affect change in the United States, and where they have power over the United States, not through their power over some other country? The most powerful woman in China might have a lot of influence over the American government, or not. I'm not sure. But what's more important is who are these people who are working within the framework of the American political system on either the U.S. or the state politics level, and have gained a great deal of power. The people on the list need to have power and not just importance. Being the first at something is only notable for this list if it makes the person powerful. For instance, Barack Obama's power came from actually being president. Mostly. I mean, you could argue that he was a transformational figure, and that might, if there was more than one president at a time, you could say he was maybe the most important president at the moment he was president. But the president of the United States is probably always going to be the most powerful person in the United States, the most powerful single person in the United States. There's no woman who is president of the United States, which kind of makes this a little bit more of a interesting question. If in future semesters Kamala Harris is president, I might change the assignment so that I say other than Kamala Harris, who are the 10 most powerful women in American politics. Your list must consist of individuals. Last semester I had somebody talked about a blog that promoted women's views, and it's possible that the person who runs that blog could be one of the most powerful women in America. I don't know that I agree with that, but I know that it is a requirement that we're talking about individuals. We're not talking about corporate entities. We're not talking about collectives. For any collective, it might be a particular person who has a great deal of power. For the U.S. House of Representatives is very powerful. So if you were very powerful in the U.S. House of Representatives, that might confer on you membership in the top 10 list. But you're not allowed to say the U.S. House of Representatives is one of your most powerful women. Internet sites are little digital code. They're not people. Your list needs to make the case for the individual's inclusion. You can't just say, this person is in the cabinet. People in the cabinet are important. Why is this particular person important? Powerful. And the power must be current, right? Madeleine Albright was Secretary of State. Madeleine Albright is still alive. Does Madeleine Albright carry a lot of power today? Probably not. So you should be aware of all of these rules and consider them as you manufacture your list. Now, beyond just who this one person is, your list can tell a story. You will undoubtedly say something about yourself in the list you choose. If you are picking people who to you are particularly powerful, your reader will compare that list to their own list, and they'll think of why did you include this person and not this other person? And people can discern something. Some might gravitate to contrarian selections, people that others are less likely to choose. Maybe you pick somebody who stands out to you as being powerful because of the influence they have over a group of people who you think are powerful, whereas other people are thinking more about the actual wielder of the power. You might just like to be controversial. If you support your selection, then that's legitimate. Some might believe that there's one true list, and if only you can gather enough information, you will be fine. Others will believe that, if I did the same list in a year, I might have an entirely different list of people, even if most of the same people remain in their current positions. Some will want to select primarily from government or formal leaders, while others will select more informal leaders, opinion leaders, influencers, I think is a term we take from social media, and I don't mind the term. I don't necessarily think that people who are influencers on social media are powerful. I think they influence people who influence people who influence people. If there's 6 degrees of separation between you and the person who tells me what my taxes are going to be, I'm skeptical, but I guess you could say that I lean toward the formal leaders. Some will be sure that they can state some office without considering that there are dozens of people with the same office. If you say, this person is powerful because they're young and they're a senator, and I'll say, yeah, but there's 20 other people who would qualify similarly. Well, why? In fact, young probably is a reason you're not powerful. But again, I invite you to make the case. I can always make my own case. In fact, when this is all over, I will tell you who my top 10 list is. I don't want to influence you. So like when we see Jeanette Rankin here on this list, on this page, it's because nobody thinks Jeanette Rankin is powerful today, although she's important as the first woman who served in the U.S. House of Representatives. As you do this, you might consider different ways of evaluating power. Certainly you can evaluate elite versus pluralist models. If you believe that a few powerful people make all of the important decisions, then it doesn't really matter who sways mass public opinion, does it? If the most powerful people in the world exclude everyone else from power, then all of the people who convince the underlings that everything is wonderful when it's not, they're not really powerful. They're sort of the lackeys of the people in power. If you do not believe that the mass public has very much to say, why would you think that someone who has access to the mass public is powerful? If you believe that a few people will hold most of the power, then the most influential members are the people who are actually central to that elite. So you're going to need to make that judgment. And of course, with elite models, as we view them in political science, we're not talking about what we wish were true. If you say that somebody believes in an elite model, where they're not saying that they support the elite, we're saying that they recognize that the elite have influence. That's entirely up to you. I think that you will need to consider this before you go ahead and make your list. You are going to also want to consider formal power versus informal power. Is the kingmaker or queenmaker more powerful than the king or queen? What do we mean by informal power? Is access really power? Access sometimes, certainly it might make you more powerful than Carl Snook if you have access to the actual leaders in the country, or to the leaders in your state, or the leaders in your community. But how can the ability to influence a powerful person be better than actually being the powerful person, unless that influence is always decisive? Maybe you're the real estate developer who tells the county commission what they're supposed to do, and the county commission always does it. Well, that makes you pretty powerful. But if you're the real estate developer who tells the county commission what to do, and they agree with you 57.5% of the time, then, I don't know, it makes you more powerful than a guy who rents in Smyrna, but it doesn't make you one of the 10 most powerful people in the county, probably. And so you don't need a title to be the shot caller. But how else do you determine who the shot caller actually is? Now, as you're evaluating power, you might also want to take into account some typical biases. First of all, think of some of the words that you might accidentally interpose with power, and that they aren't really power at all. Best known, most inspirational, on the correct side of issues as you see it, sociable, attractive, currently in the news, humorous, innovative, from my hometown. I live in Cherokee County, and Dean Rusk is from Cherokee County, and so they named a school after him. They talk about him like he was somebody special, but if you didn't live in Georgia, would you have ever heard of him? Yeah, probably if you're an expert on the 1960s, but maybe not in 2020. It's the person from your social group. These are all terms that are different from power. Young people tend to be biased toward the relatively young politicians. And there's nothing illegitimate about being a young politician, except that much of the American political system is based on building seniority, or at least building relationships. And if you're in your first couple terms in office, you're still sort of an apprentice in the entire scheme of things. And so we don't want to overstate the power of the young just because they're the ones who you might be paying the most attention to. But I'll tell you, there's another side of the coin. Old people tend to be biased toward people who've been in power for a long time, because they're old like us, and we remember when they were young like us. And so many of those people would best be described as formerly powerful. I mentioned Madeleine Albright, or Jimmy Carter, right? Jimmy Carter hasn't been one of the 10 most powerful people in the United States, for 40 years, 41 years. So it's, just because I've heard of him, just because he was powerful when I was a kid, doesn't mean that he's a powerful person today. So, at the same time, there's people who might still be in power, but they aren't quite the person they were. You could maybe mention somebody like Bill Clinton, or if we were we are talking about women in politics, think particularly of somebody like Hillary Clinton. Think particularly about somebody who might have formerly been in a cabinet position. Nikki Haley. These are people who've been powerful, but are they powerful anymore? And the answer is often no. So you should try to avoid these biases. Now, here's a little fun extra. You've noticed I've listed or I've shown photographs of many famous people. On the cover, there was the photograph of the soccer team that I just got a stock photo of. But I think that all these other women who we've seen all are actual famous people. So right here, I've shown two really famous people. One person who's famous with my bias toward political science, and one who's famous because of my bias towards Kennesaw State. And so the first person to correctly identify both of the women on this slide can get 3 bonus points, especially if you correctly identify why I think that they were important given my bias. Now, this is probably the most important young woman in America to me. Certainly not the most powerful. I regularly tell her what to do and she has to do it. But I'm not looking for someone to agree with me. You don't need to have the same list that I would have. But I am looking for you to answer the question for yourself, to engage the topic seriously, and to come up with a list that you can support and defend. But within the rules that I've laid out here, the choices are yours. And I wish you all well. Anybody who correctly identifies these people on the previous slide, what I'm going to do is I am going to create a new discussion. And so the first person who gives a list of both women and who says why they were important, one to the field of political science and one to Kennesaw State University, will get the 3 bonus points. If you identify who they are at all, I will give you 1 bonus point, sort of your advantage for having watched the slide presentation to the end. Good luck, everyone. And if you have any questions whatsoever about the paper, please contact me, and I will do my best to help you write a good paper.